In this lecture, we have talked about a few case studies of ethical reasoning, and they were rather simple cases, right? We use those cases to develop what the authors called the paramedics method for ethics reasoning. And it's a very good method, very simple, easy to apply. At this part of the lecture, the final part of the lecture, we're going to talk about a very serious problem, very modern, very timely problem, and so which I'll leave it in your hands to apply the paramedics method, which is the problem of bias in machine learning. Just before we talk about bias in machine learning, let's understand in a nutshell what is a modern algorithm in machine learning. And I point you to this article that explains in a kind of very simple way what is a machine learning algorithm. But in a nutshell, you have a bunch of data, input raw data, of certain categories. So in this, this is a good picture because you have red dots, green dots, and purple dots. And then you have this algorithm, and the algorithm is trained with a training set. Let me get a pointer. With a training set, and given the desired output. So you want the algorithm to, after training process, if you have an input of a red dot, the algorithm would process this red dot and put it into the class red dot. And the same thing for the other colors of dots. So this is basically a classifier. It's not much different than a regression method. What is a regression? In a regression, you have a bunch of points, which are data points of some sort, of something, maybe an audio signal. And what you want your regression method to do is to find which function generated these points. And it's going to fit the closest function, which could be a kind of a sine wave here, right? So this is regression for you. Machine learning is doing the same thing, but it's actually finding patterns. This is a simple regression, right? So you're finding patterns on a bidimensional attribute space. We have two attributes, x and y here. So it's a two-dimensional. What the modern methods of machine learning are doing, they are finding patterns into multi-dimensional data sets. This could be anything. This could be pictures of cats, dogs, and pictures, and then the algorithm's gonna learn to differentiate cat from dogs. Or this could be different breeds of dogs, and the algorithm is going to be able to differentiate. This could be different kinds of cancer cells, and the algorithm is going to analyze the images and classify what type of cancer cell it is. So basically, it's a function approximator, and this approximator, it's quite powerful because in theory it can approximate any function whatsoever. Whatever you want to classify, it can find, in theory, it can find a good function. So, but there is a caveat here, right? Which is the training set. The training set is the key when we start talking about ethics in modern artificial intelligence, which basically boils down to ethics in machine learning, is how you use the training set, because the algorithm is going to find this function according to the input set that you give. Of course, if this input set is not typical of the phenomena that you're watching, your function will be wrong. Your function will be wrong. Imagine if I have a multi-dimensional, multivariate data set, and you are training that with the wrong, you're training your classifier with the wrong set of data, you are going to get pretty bad outputs. And some of these outputs, they have real consequences. And that's some of the consequences. I'm going to be pointing you to the literature now. You can do this example. So this is a simple thing that you can do with Google. So if you get Hungarian, Hungarian is a language that has no gender pronouns. So there's no he or she. There's just O. I can't pronounce it. I don't know how to pronounce it. So, but once you pass through Google Translator, which I think currently they fixed for English, but if you try French, German, or any other European languages, or try the Far Eastern language, or I don't know, you're still going to find this gender stereotype. So this phrase here is translated as she is beautiful. This is translated as he is clever. Notice that the pronoun is the same. So why Google Translator translated this to she is beautiful and this to he is clever? And it goes on, right? He reads, she washes dishes. He builds, she sews. He teaches, she cooks. He is researching, she is raising a child. The pronouns are all the same. The words are all the same, right? So basically in this process, the machine learning was trained with a biased data, was trained with a data that had as much as the majority of inputs was connecting the feminine to beauty, washes dishes, sews, cooks, and the masculine with clever, reads, builds. This is definitely a sexist mistake, a sexist problem, almost criminal. But it wasn't. Is it? Well, again, is it so? Now apply your recently learned ethical reasoning to analyze this problem, right? This is just a feature of the training data set. It's just a feature of the training data set. If it sees that the majority of the cases that she is washing and he is reading, he's going to interpret this as she is washing, and I can't read Hungarian, and this as he builds. Simple as that. So what's the problem? That's for you to decide. Apply your ethical reasoning. This goes on, right? So this goes on. You can. There's this wonderful article. It's available on this link. I'd recommend you to read all of these links from this part of the lecture, because these are all the discussion goes on. So if you put on Google an African name, you're gonna get ads as this African name connected to arrested, public records, right? If you put an European name, you don't find the same thing. You don't find the same thing. This is racism. Again, is it racism? It's just a feature of the training set. It's just a feature of the training set. The machine learning just learns a function according to the input that it's given. Is it or is it not? Apply the ethics, the parametric ethics to decide on that. That's a feature of the YouTube feedback loops. There's this YouTube video explaining, it's a talk explaining the toxic potential for YouTube feedback loops. So basically, if you do that, your model is controlling the next round of data that is used to build the very same model. The model is this, right? The model is what the machine learning system learned, right? Imagine that you get the output of your model the categories and you feedback and train the algorithm with this output. What you're doing, you are reinforcing these categories. You are reinforcing these categories. That's what YouTube does. YouTube, that's the feedback loop in YouTube. That's the YouTube AI is directed to optimizing engagement. So YouTube wants us to watch this more and more because then there are more clicks to the sponsors and they get rich. So basically, if you like cats, YouTube will only point you to cat films. While after a while, you believe that there is only cats in the world. That whoever loves dogs is a madman, right? So you can replace cats by any political idea or criminal behavior. And you are actually reinforcing it. YouTube feedback loops reinforces it. And there are recent examples. We are going to be talking in a minute, the QAnon and the pedophilic networks that thrive in YouTube. And they are reinforced by YouTube. This is an article explaining the QAnon. That's a wonderful article of a journalist that spent 2 months in QAnon networks, and he talks about how this feedback loop works. I'm sorry, the link's quite long. I'll post this PDF, not PDF, this PPT in the flow site, so that you can click. But if you type on Google Trump, QAnon, Washington, Capitol Hill, you're going to get to this wonderful article. Yeah. And also to this article, reasonably recent, that appeared on the New York Times as well, explaining how this feedback loop in YouTube reinforces pedophilia, right? And also there's been you can also train to even more more ethical challenged questions. So you can train a classifier like this to recognize distinct kinds of people, distinct races. And that's what the government of China did. In 1 month, 500,000 face scans, how China is using AI to profile a minority. And so they have a kind of Uyghur detector. It's AI. So analyze the ethics of that using the paramedic method that we just learned. This question comes from it has a question of the use of data in questionable terms. It's a long one and it's been used. This article talks a little bit about the history. It was used during the Nazi regime, and it was used even before to single out distinct groups and basically exterminate them. So data is a very powerful tool. Data combined with machine learning, combined with feedback loop, is an even more dangerous tool. So you should bear in mind the ethics of everything you do. You are now responsible for your projects. In order for you to know more, I definitely recommend you this free class. There's a course, a full course on neural networks. And I think everybody should see this course because they are wonderful and they explain the concepts very fast. It's called Fast AI, right? And in particular, lesson 5 is Rachel Thomas' lecture on ethics in data science. Don't miss it. It's a 2-hour lecture on ethics in data science. I do recommend you if you have 2 hours to spare this week, watch Rachel Thomas' lecture. And to close up, there's also the question of lethal autonomous weapon. A lethal autonomous weapon is a robot that chooses a target, decides whether to fire at the target or not, and fire it, and fire at the target. And there's been a long discussion about whether this is ethical, whether this, on one side you can say that if you have a very smart machine killing people, it's only gonna kill the bad people and it's gonna spare the good people. There's always the question of who defines who's bad and who is not bad. Are you gonna leave a machine to decide on that? And who pays for mistakes? Who's responsible for a mistake that a machine makes? That's a long question. You can read my paper. My paper, that's this paper here. You can probably download it using the, if you are on the at university site. University pays for this. This appeared in the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. That's a historic journal. It was created by the members of the Manhattan Project after they worked on the development of the atomic bomb. So it's directed at discussing ethical questions in science in general. And in this article, in many other articles, they are discussing the problem of autonomous, lethal autonomous weapons. And that's it for today. We'll go back to the technical stuff next week. Well, I'm released that we finished this lecture. This was the most difficult lecture to build because it's very hard for me not to put my own analysis and my own opinions, and of course in some points I just had to, because that's the nature. We cannot. We are creatures of our opinions. And the selection of articles that I've put to you to read also shows the directions of my thinking. So bear in mind that when you're talking about ethics and we're talking about moral, it's always going to be the opinion of somebody. And I want you to start having your own opinion. But this opinion should be informed. So read about this stuff. Don't just go to YouTube and watch the latest YouTube video on this thing, and well, watch YouTube videos from great people, but not from anyone that's posting stuff. Right. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time for the technical part.